The muffled sounds of upbeat jazz could be heard through the bar's blue wooden door, in tune with the jingle being played on the piano in the corner. Outside, thousands were parading around in skimpy outfits and feathered masks, enjoying the last of the Mardi Gras celebrations. The streets were littered with barely legal women trading their self-respect for a few measly dollar store beads. Parquets and drunkards saturated the cobblestone sidewalks, while elaborate floats inched their way down the route in a seemingly endless succession. Crews had spent the year preparing for this night, lovingly gluing a craft store's worth of glitter and feathers on their carnivalesque floats. Moderation was the antithesis of Mardi Gras. The bar was a lone island refuge in an ocean of overwhelming colours and sounds that had become of the French Quarter. Discreetly nested in a narrow alleyway just outside of Bourbon Street, the dive was surprisingly empty that night. There was only the bartender polishing a glass behind the counter, a stranger at the piano, and me, the man who picked the worst time of the year to do some sightseeing in New Orleans. Call it a rite of passage, if you want, but I'd always wanted to be part of the celebration at least once in my life. Unfortunately, I grew wary of the ceaseless party almost as soon as it began. "Hey, bartender," I said, trying to get his attention. I still hadn't been served. The piano's melody, the only sound I could stand in the cacophony of trumpets, saxophones and trombones, came to an abrupt stop. Her player left her hanging mid-song, like a selfish lover refusing to tend to her post-coital needs. Gesticulating with his arms with cartoonish theatrics, he slid off the bench and turned to face me. His appearance caused a momentary twinge of fear in my chest. His chocolate skin had been painted to resemble a skeleton. His lips were made to look like brittle teeth. His face was mostly white and full of fake cracks and shadows. An inverted black heart had been drawn at the base of his nose, and black paint had been applied around his eyes to make them look like empty sockets. A bulky snake clung to his shoulders like a scarf. The man wore a top hat with black, red and ochre feathers coming out of the left side, as well as a bundle of red skulls around the rim. He wore a black dress shirt, red vest and dark overcoat. A variety of change dangled from pocket to pocket with no clear purpose, and a belt made of tiny skulls surrounded his waist and clattered whenever he moved. He certainly earned the double take I gave him. In any other city, or on any other night, he would have been an oddity. But as I composed myself and let my startled nerves settle, I realized he was just another carnival goer. The old man, or at least I think he was old, casually strolled to the other side of the counter. He placed a hand on the bartender's back and moved him aside. Unaffected, the tender continued to polish his glass absent-mindedly. Could he have been deaf, perhaps? "What will it be?" asked the skeletal-faced pianist, through a thick New Orleans accent. I figured he was staff, so I replied, "Something strong." Yes, I know just the thing for you, my friend. Let Papa Chen make you his specialty," he replied. He started to work his magic, mixing together different vials of booze and flipping the containers in the air with expertise. I watched in silence, captivated by the show. HN was definitely putting his colleague to shame. The result, however, was a foul-looking concoction, akin to a forest bog. I looked at the sludgy, greenish-brown liquid in the hopes that the colours and texture would somehow improve once the bubbling came to a stop, but my hopes were for naught. Etienne peered at me with great interest, his painted toothy smile stretching. Go on, drink up, my friend. I guarantee it'll make the world seem like a whole different place. Not wanting to be rude, I decided to give it a try. Bottoms up, I thought, taking a reluctant but large gulp of the contents in my glass. The taste was vicious, like tree bark or a half-ton of pine cones put through a food processor. The thick liquid fought me all the way down my throat. Now I knew why the bar was empty. Anyone who'd had a taste of this must have run for the hills. I gagged and coughed, pushing the glass aside. But all of a sudden, I felt good. No, not just good, downright euphoric. Hey, what is in this? I asked, as my head spun with a pleasant buzz. Just herbs and roots. A tingling sensation prickled its way from the back of my neck and crawled down my spine, numbing it with its warmth. From the mirror hanging behind the bar, I could see my pupils had dilated so wide that my eyes looked utterly black. Whatever Etienne had given me had definitely been worth the nauseating flavor. Listen, my friend, I need you to do something for me, said Etienne. He leaned in close and whispered in my ear, but the words came out jumbled. It was like having double vision, but with my ears instead of my eyes. I could only make out a few stray words, hardly enough to understand the message. Without wanting to, my body shifted into a standing position. That was my first hint that something odd was happening to me. The next was when I finally realized something. The bartender hadn't stopped polishing the same glass since I'd arrived. Through my blurring vision, I peered at his reflection. His pupils were like mine, and his facial expression was strangely blank. I wanted to say something, but my mouth wouldn't open. I tried to move my arm, but it wouldn't budge. My body no longer obeyed me. Papa Etienne leapt energetically over the bar and landed inches from me, his snake's head close enough for its forked tongue to kiss my cheek. Looking me in the eyes, Etienne reached into his coat and pulled out an object out of view. I felt him placing it in my hands. The object was cold, cylindrical, grainy, and had a bit of weight to it. I could only speculate as to its nature, because I was unable to drop my gaze to see what it was. Go now, friend, he began, leaning close to my ears. His next words eluded me, but the unmistakable cold tone he used made my stomach tighten like a fist. As though pulled forth by a puppet master's strings, my body took slow steps towards the door. I tried to will myself to stop, but my hazy mind wasn't strong enough to resist Papa Etienne's influence. It felt as though I was moving through someone else's eyes. My body didn't feel like my own anymore. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, I couldn't even blink on my own. The only thing I had control over were my eyeballs. Even then, they served little purpose when I couldn't even turn my head to fully examine things. I was forced to watch as my hands pushed the cobalt door open. As soon as I exited the building, my ears were assaulted by a wall of deafening music. I progressed towards Bourbon Street and the rowdy crowd populating it. They gyrated to the obnoxious beat and cheered as a succession of floats wheeled by. There was something odd about them, though. Something I hadn't noticed before. The crowd's movements were jagged and laggy, as though I was seeing them through a strobe light. Then again, it was wholly possible that I had Pape Chen's drink to thank for that unsettling effect. Out of nowhere, a woman in an ornate mask flew in front of me, and then slid back, motioning for me to follow. As she drifted farther away, her face began to morph. Her bedazzled, feathered mask took on an altogether different appearance. Instead of a stiff piece of handcrafted cardboard, it became malleable and clutched to her face like a second skin. The holes of its eyes became as dark as a bottomless well. Then someone bumped into me, shifting my narrow line of sight to a group of young women dancing without fear of judgment. They too metamorphosed into hideous shapes that brought goosebumps to my flesh. Their skin peeled off with a ripping sound, revealing serpentine scales underneath. They weren't human, they were demons. Demons using the carnival setting to masquerade among the living. The more I looked at the crowd, the more otherworldly creatures I saw. The old woman in the wheelchair, a fiery beast on a chariot of thorns. The duo hitting on a pregnant woman, they were feathered beasts with crooked yellow teeth. Two pitch-black eyes locked onto mine, as something I hesitate to call a man reached its meaty hand to my shoulder. A portion of his face had melted off to reveal a porous skull coated in writhing maggots. Through the holes of his incomplete set of teeth, I could see his tongue flicking back and forth like a twig in the breeze. A thick, black substance oozed out of his nose and dampened what was left of a bushy moustache on his good side. Despite the festive green and purple suit he wore, he evoked nothing but unadulterated terror. As he stumbled closer to me, I could smell a mix of rotten eggs and booze on his breath. The odor didn't mix well with the drink I'd ingested, causing my stomach to gurgle in protest. If that wasn't bad enough, his viscous tongue rolled out of his mouth and slithered towards my cheek. My arm darted forward of its own volition, and I felt something wet and sticky drizzle over my hand. The man groaned, released my shoulder, and doubled over. Black blood seeped out of his guts, and I knew it was the same substance coating my fingertips. Another shove, and I momentarily lost eye contact with the demon. When I saw him again, however, I was shocked to find that it was just a regular man, his face twisted in a look of pain and betrayal. He was just a pudgy, middle-aged guy trying to make sense of his final moments, his throat straining to call for help over the sound of jazz and people cheering. He died without anyone noticing. I felt a presence at my side. From the corner of my eyes, I peeked at the alleyway. Dark tendrils rose from the shadows and weaved together into the shape of a man. Into the shape of Pape Chen. "Come," he murmured, his soft voice somehow louder than the music around us. He led me back into the bar, where I spotted his snake slowly coiling itself around the tender. Was I going to suffer the same fate? "You did better than I expected," said Pape Chen, as he circled around me and pulled the object from my hands. He turned me away from the bartender and held the object in his gloved fingers up to my face, showing me a bloodied knife. Hundreds of tormented faces had been carved into its ivory handle. Their mouths opened and closed as crimson drizzles pushed over the edge and reached them. Now, don't look so grim, friend. You did well today. Got the right target," he said excitedly. "He didn't even try to fight it. That's good. Pape Chen doesn't like the strong will." A crunching noise resonated through the empty bar. For once, I was glad I couldn't move. I didn't want to look. Papa Chen hummed a pleasant tune, smirking as he looks me over from top to bottom. "Since you were such a good sport, I'll even let you go, friend. As long as you don't tell anyone about this. And if you even consider it, remember that I have this." He placed the knife on the counter and leaned against the wall, motioning to it. "It's got your fingerprints all over it, I'm afraid," he taunted. The prickling sensation in my spine started to fade away ever so slowly, and I found myself able to move my fingertips. I was too afraid of what would happen if Papa Chan found out, so I stayed still as a statue. "Oh, friend, why don't you have a little fun on the house?" he said, eyes gleaming with amusement. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a velvet pouch, and slipped his fingers inside. In one swift motion, he outstretched his hand and blew a light glittery powder into my face. I felt an instant high, then nothing. I woke up, draped over my hotel bed like a towel on a lawn chair, with sirens whirring off in the distance. The light of the sun prickled like needles in my retinas from a nasty hangover, the strength of which I hadn't experienced in ages. My head seemed as though it was about to collapse on itself, and the sensation worsened when I sat up and my blood rushed painfully into my cranium. Through anguished groans, I staggered to the restroom, applied a wet towel to my forehead, and popped a few pills. As I waited for the painkillers to kick in, I began to wonder how I'd returned to the hotel, and more importantly, what had I done after leaving the bar? Did I even want to know? I looked at myself in the mirror and was surprised to see that I was in relatively good condition. No scratches, no blood, not even a single misplaced hair on my head. Perhaps it had all been an hallucination. At least, that's what I thought until I saw the headline on the morning paper. That pudgy man's face was plastered above the fold, as though threatening to unveil my crime to the world. I needed to run. I needed air. I darted to the balcony, holding my hand to my mouth. I felt ill, terrified, horrified. What had I done? The party hadn't missed a beat, despite the events that had unfolded. Jazz music was still playing, people were still dancing in the streets, and floats were still driving by. As I looked into the crowd, I saw Papa Chen looking back at me. He tipped his top hat, smiled wryly, and disappeared into the alleyway. I'm not sure what compelled me to chase after him, but he was long gone by the time I made it outside. He wasn't the only thing missing, however. I never found the alleyway or the bar, just brick walls as far as the eye could see. 10 people went missing that night, and a few were confirmed dead in the weeks following. The worst thing is not knowing whether or not I had a hand in those disappearances. I can't help but wonder, if I had resisted Papa Chen's influence that night, would I have been one of them? Oh hey, look at you, you made it all the way to the end of the story. I hope my voice didn't terrify you all too much, although I'm sure you'll be just fine. Before we get into the review, cause I heard that's what TCR likes to do, and therefore I will humour him, I would like to pull your attention to the other 2 videos that I've pulled up here. The left one is Follicles of Fear, also made by Man and Lyset, which is a horrifying, little bit more grueling tale about hair. Really creepy hair, so if you like this style of story, then you might enjoy this one. This one's a little bit more gory though, so if that's your thing, then go watch that. While we're on the little bit more gory train, I've recently started narrating The 1%, which is last month's No Sleep monthly contest winner, which I always narrate. If you look at the No Sleep contest page, I am on there actually as a prize, so go ahead, win that, I'll narrate your story. The 1% is a collection of stories centered around a very peculiar doctor, so you might enjoy those as well. And while you're over at my channel, why don't you subscribe? And while you're here, why don't you like this video? Cause you know that, Creepy Reading always puts a lot of work into his videos. So, anyway, on to the review. Man and Lyset is actually one of my friends, and I got this story as a bit of a preview. The story will actually be out next Tuesday on No Sleep, so go check him out over there, as well as his Facebook page, which hosts all his stories, and all his stories are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. He's my favorite Quebecois, although he doesn't like me saying that. Anyway, on to the story. How long has it been since you actually heard a voodoo story? Because voodoo stories are usually very cliched. You have like the little dolls and the pins and the needles, but this story pulls it off without pulling out any of those cliches. Sure, there is bodily control, but there's no like smoking circles and pots, and there's just a drink and a very creepy old man with a very creepy dagger. And simply the fact that you do not know what this man wants. You don't know what the goal of this man is. What does he need that dagger for? Why does he need to kill people? Is it some kind of blood sacrifice? The mystery. I like mystery. I like stories that leave questions. I'm sure you've heard many times on, if you ever visit No Sleep, that people ask for series, follow-ups. I don't like follow-ups. I like one concise story like this. This doesn't need a follow-up. It could create an entire series, but it doesn't need it. This story leaves the questions that leave you awake at night. And after all, that is what we try to do. Keep you awake at night. It's called No Sleep. Get it? So, on to another aspect that I really like about this story. Most creepypastas and No Sleep stories happen in isolation. Happen with one person being alone and being stalked by a ghost or something, or maybe a very small group, like 2 or 3. But in this case, it's the Mardi Gras festival. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people go there and party like for days. And somehow Manon manages to pull out a perfect horror stories in the midst of all these partygoers. Sure, the bar is itself in isolation, but that doesn't mean that the story is not interesting. The monsters that he sees on the street, I paired it up with some actual sounds from the Mardi Gras, which I picked off the internet, which is really nice. I ended up slowing it down at the end. I'm not quite sure if you noticed that. And you just feel what he feels, like he's lost in that crowd and he's seeing things and his body isn't following him. And I really like that in a story. There's one but though. I think the end of the story was a little bit dragged out. I think it could use a bit more of an abrupt stop. It didn't need this entire epilogue, is what I think. But again, it's not my story, and outros are there to be outros. Your intro is supposed to be brilliant, your outro matters a tad less, although it might leave a sour taste in someone's mouth in the end. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that. Again, like, favorite, and do all that good stuff with this video, and then please come over to my channel and subscribe, because I would really like to show you around my humble abode. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a good day and a frightful night.